Fallout 4. Definitely one of my favorite games. Uh, I will say, I'm a New Vegas fan. Okay, New Vegas is my favorite Fallout game. I'll put it out there just so you know. But definitely one of my favorites. And I was, thinking last night about one of the things that the game kind of puts out there as a potential theory, potential thought provoker in the Far Harbor DLC. You get to a point and one of the a synth kind of questions your character as to whether your character is a synth, and I kind of wanted to look into that a bit on my own, on whether I personally think that the protagonist is a synth or not. I'm not claiming that I have all the answers, but I think I've come to a personal conclusion that I think I side with more on the two spectrums. There's a lot of evidence on both sides of the argument. I think at the end of the day, Bethesda kind of did want you to decide at least a little bit to yourself. They left enough crumbs in both directions, you know. But I personally think, uh, I'm gonna get some hate for this. I personally believe that your protagonist is not a synth. I know, crazy. Most people out here on the internet think otherwise, but I personally am of the belief that our boy Nate is not a synth. And, I'll go over the things that I found that kind of, I'm not completely dissuading, as I said, this is just what I think, in my personal opinion, that he would not be a synth. Now, the female protagonist, I do give more props to being a synth, as she is just a lawyer. But you could also make that argument about pretty much all of the Fallout games. The only protagonist that could like actually be fighters, so to speak, like are the one from 2 and the one from uh, New Vegas. All the rest are just vault boys that really should have no business being such a Giga Chad, but they are. So, that whole argument of like, oh, well, she was just a lawyer. She shouldn't be able to do all this crazy stuff and whatnot. It's like, you could say that about the guy from 3 and the guy from 1 and whatnot. Like, it's the same. Like, they grew up in a vault. They're sheltered. They shouldn't just come out here fighting big monsters, like, no problem, you know? So, you can make that argument on both sides. I don't personally think that sways, but I still do think it makes more sense because they, went out of their way to be like, oh yeah, Nora, she's a lawyer, and Nate's a soldier. So I get that. I get why, So yeah, I do think, if you thought Nora was the main protagonist, there is a bit more saying probably a synth. I would agree, but at the end of the day, I still think human than being real humans is more likely overall. And I have a couple things that, lead me to believe this. First off and foremost, one of the most obviously important things is just Sanctuary itself. As you go through, the intro of the game, which I'm having played in the background here, the you can take note of like how his house looks, all the stuff set up, the neighborhood and whatnot, the buildings, where things are, and they line up pretty well, not perfectly, but pretty well with the sanctuary in the future. Now, of course, you can argue, well, you're a synth. It's based on that, but you have to do. I personally, it's just there's a lot. Like it's possible, yes. Like the father could have sent a bunch of synths to perfectly recognize, reconstruct, and whatnot, all of the stuff from the past and put it into the future. It's possible. It's possible. I think unlikely though, because you do know that the father, he is the leader of the institute, but he wasn't. He it did take him a while, so it was a good bit later in his life when he became the leader. And before then, he was just a, scientist. He was not treated well at first, and then eventually, he was brought up, and so that so and they don't leave the institute either. So if he did want this data, he would have to send out a courser or his own synth to collect all this data for him. And a lot of it is like, it could be possible, but it seems too close to reality. Like, there's not, like, in a scenario where, obviously, if he's a synth, you're assuming everything you see from the past is all simulation. It's not real. It's fabricated memories, which, I personally don't believe because, for one, Sean is an infant, obviously. He has no memories of the past, so he would have no clue about, the goings on of the past. So, him having a full memory of like how the house is set up, like what people sound like, for starters, because assuming that it's all fake, Nora or whoever you're, of course, once again, I'm assuming that you're playing as a male character for this. Her voice sounds exactly the same as you can get a recording from Codsworth. So, not fabricated by the Institute. There's 0% chance of that. And she sounds exactly like she sounds in your memories. Which, once again, I don't know. Like, you could claim that when Kellogg comes to steal Sean, he could have gotten a recording from that, maybe. But once again, I think that's unlikely that he perfectly replicated her voice just from her, like, screaming and, like, demanding they don't take Sean. So I think that's a bit of a leap to claim he could perfectly replicate her voice just based on that, because we know he couldn't have gotten the tapes from Codsworth, obviously, as obviously Codsworth wouldn't have given it to him, and also doesn't, unless they manipulate it with Codsworth memory, which, once again, making a lot of jumps, a lot of assumptions there, which, on both sides you are making assumptions, but, like, I'm saying Sean himself in this universe would have to make a lot of assumptions about how the past was like, how their house was, all that, which, once again, he could, because there's no one to question him, because, you're a synth. There's not, everything you're seeing in the past would be fake in that scenario, but I think it's too well done, because, like, obviously we don't know exactly how the synth text works. We had a good idea based on characters like Paladin Dance, who, like, has no idea he's a synth the whole time and whatnot. But I also think that, I don't know, it's too close to reality for me to personally believe the simulation is all fake. No, I will say something. I made a couple things from the simulation, because, once again, I'm not gonna like act like the proof on the synth side isn't real. Like, there is proof to say that as well. I just lean towards the human side. I did note that in your memories, there's the scenes where people are, like, leaving their suitcases, and I, for some reason, remembered they were actually there when you played the game through, but they weren't. So that was one of my main things that I was thinking helped supported that you were human, and he, like, forgot to put suitcases. But I was wrong about that. There aren't the suitcases exactly where they were left. And another thing I noticed that could lead it towards being, this one could go both ways. It's just how you interpret it, because in the dream, which, I'm assuming I'm calling it a dream because it's up to debate once again if anything you see in the past is real, because if you're a synth, it's all fake. But if you are human, it's all real. And one of the things I noticed is outside your house that is the Vault Tech van when the bombs are going off. So either that part of the memory wasn't, like, that further proves that you're a synth and it's just not there, or you could claim that the Vault Tech guy ran, jumped in his van, and started driving away. Which, since he's alive and a ghoul, which I will get to later, I do believe that is the most likely thing, that he jumps in his van and starts driving away from the explosion. That's what I'd say would happen to the van. And because, as I said, we're focusing on the human side more so, is what I think would happen. And then, notice things from the dream bodies are pretty close to where they would have been, stuff like that. He has, what you call it? There's various objects and similar things. Even, like, in the video I show, I kind of glance into one of the side buildings, and all the objects in there are matched up with what's in the, current time in the game. So I think it's just, the father would have had to do a astronomical amount of research to do the dream correctly, which seeing how he's doing this all undercover, none of his other scientists know about it. It's possible, once again, it is possible, but I think it's unlikely that he could have done such a good job replicating, everything between the past and the current and the present. I think he did way too good of a job in the simulation to claim it was a simulation. It's too well done. For example, one of the things I noticed is there was a destroyed part of the fence in your dream, and it was kind of barricaded up, and you see that it was also like that. And another thing to mention is in one of the blue buildings I looked in for a moment, you saw all the desk fan and all that was set up, but now it's destroyed. And that's little stuff like that. I don't think he'd go through the effort of, looking at and replicating if it was false. For him to research all of it and get it down to T seems, I don't know, it just seems not possible, so to speak. It's possible, but it's unlikely. I still think it leads more towards him, you being a human and not a synth. And so we'll get to the next part, which is, once again, very important, is the Vault Tech guy still being alive. And of course, he recalls what you look like. He sounds the same, more or less. So of course he sounds like a ghoul, but he still has the same voice, which is important to mention. And of course he recognizes you and he's still alive. And of course you can make the argument, well, Sean, he went, father, I would just call him father. The father went and, had him interviewed and whatnot, and basically found out about what happened 2 years ago, and when he went to the house and kind of got his side of the story, which, yeah, you can make that argument that he did do that, but once again, I find that unlikely, because the Institute, I don't think they're fans of ghouls from my understanding, and for him to, also just kind of leave him alive in a weird way of saying, I don't think that makes much sense. I don't know why he'd, interview him and then just be like, okay, cool, bye. It's just one of those things I think is unlikely, once again.
They didn't tell you?
And, I also think him, the Institute rep, the ghoul I'm referring to, also probably would have maybe mentioned it even. If he was like, oh yes, you think in his dialogue, he'd be like, oh yeah, someone was asking about you a little while ago. You think that would come up, but he doesn't mention anything like that. Similar with Codsworth. Codsworth does not mention anyone talking to him, which John would have had to better understand things. You'd probably try and talk to Codsworth, but Codsworth is a robot, so he could have been manipulated, which, that's possible, that's very possible. But once again, I think is unlikely, once again, because, Codsworth doesn't show any signs of tampering or anything, so unless they did manipulate his memory, which I don't know much about, how the robots work, admittedly. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if the Institute can do that. Maybe they can. We don't see many robots in their hideouts, so I don't know how well they can operate on Robco and whatnot. Robco robots and whatnot. I don't know how proficient they are in that. But once again, it's possible. They could have done that. I think it's unlikely. Because you do have to remember, once again, this would be the father acting rogue. Because he does not, no one knows about this but him. In this scenario, it's all him acting rogue. So I think just him doing all this behind everyone's back, there's a lot of work to go into that I don't think he would be able to get away with, so to speak. I don't think he'd been able to do all this. And then my next kind of thing that I thought about was, of course, Kellogg. Now, Kellogg, I'm unsure, to put bluntly, Kellogg's mainly opinion, because I don't know if the Institute could manipulate his memories as well, because he does have a chip, and that's what you use to look at and to see the memories, and I'm unsure of if they can, manipulate his memories or not, because according to Kellogg's memories, of course, he recognizes you, you see him, he sees you. So that kind of lines up there. Of course, once again, you could claim, oh, well, yeah, the real Nate saw that and whatnot, but, the father, got rid of his body after he died or whatever. in there and chucked his body away, put in the synth, and gave the synth the memories of Kellogg, which, once again, possible. I think unlikely. Once again, I think is unlikely. Um, because Kellogg's obviously not high ranking. He's not told much, but like, there's just things in his memory that like you think they would wipe that kind of stuff if they could, you know? Like, he does know a good bit of stuff about the Institute. Why would they? If they can wipe his memory, why wouldn't they wipe that stuff as well? You know, that kind of thing. Like the whole scene with him and the Courser and, you know, the son. Of course, you can argue, well, Sean wants, you know, the protagonist to find that out so you can get to him. But I just disagree once again. I think, I think that is unlikely. I do believe that Kellogg memories probably are unaltered. I doubt the father altered his memories at all. And so, yeah, that's how I think about that part. Now, the other major thing people say about the whole synth thing is that the whole point of your dad, well, your protagonist being a synth, is Sean wanted to get, you know, your character to replace him, which does make sense until, in my personal opinion, I don't think Sean would do that, because from all the interactions you have with him throughout his quest line, he doesn't seem to like synths at all. Just like most of the Institute, he treats them like tools. So I don't really think it's likely that he would choose to have a synth be his successor, even if he's like, you know, blinded by his wish to have a, you know, see his father or mother again. But once again, we're assuming you're playing as the male, have his father like reunited again. I don't think he personally, like, he would do that, but I don't think he would give you so much freedom. I think it would be more like the child version of himself, where it's very clearly a tool experiment. Whereas with your protagonist, you're free reigned. Like if you were a synth, you'd think the second you show up to the Institute and flat out decline the father, refuse to help him, he would just use your synth code and be like, well, this experiment failed. And he would do that. So I feel it's a bit odd that that doesn't happen, or he'd send a courser after you and do that. But he doesn't. That further leads me to believe you are a human, because why would he allow what he would now presume to be a rogue synth, which throughout the whole quest line you actively hunt down rogue synths. He clearly hates rogue things, synths. He wants to return them back to the fold. You are effectively a rogue synth the second you refuse him, if you believe you're a synth. And I don't know why he'd allow you to keep operating and actively destroy the Institute when he could just use your recall code and deactivate you whenever he wanted, if you were a synth. And then you could make the argument, well, he just didn't give you one. And which I don't think makes any sense. Why would he actively not give a synth a recall code? As I've mentioned, he clearly doesn't like synths. I don't believe Sean likes synths at all. I think he, like everyone else, views them as tools. I don't think it's likely that he would allow a synth to have free reign like your protagonist does. It doesn't make sense to me as far as that goes. I personally believe that if you were a synth, he wouldn't have let you do so much so freely. So that's my opinion on that argument of you were created. So like, I don't, so if you are a synth, I don't believe that's the reason he made you, because that just doesn't make sense to me at all. I truly believe that you are a human. You are not a synth, as I've stated. You know, like, once again, I'm not just waiting. I'm not saying it's impossible that you are a synth. I just think it's unlikely. I think, like, everything you have to say that you're a synth takes a lot of leaps and bounds to kind of reach that conclusion. It's kind of, you have to go out of your way to say he's a synth. Now, another thing, shout out TK Mantis. I love the guy's videos, but he makes the point that your character can use VATS in the vault before picking up your Pip-Boy, which pretty much definitively is like, well, you clearly are like some kind of synth. You got targeting systems. I disagree. I think that was just kind of a, you know, Bethesda kind of made a bit of a mistake there without realizing it, and they wanted to, have VATS in the tutorial, but kind of just was like, oh crap, we didn't give them the VATS yet, give them a Pits Boy yet, and then just never kind of really thought about it that deeply, and kind of just made a bit of a mistake. That's what I think that is. I don't really take that as evidence personally. I think that was just a wee bit of a blunder on their part, and people would say, well, oh, why didn't they patch it then? Patch it out. And it's like, that's kind of a, Bethesda's kind of common. They're kind of known for not patching things like that. But, also it's just for their tutorial that they'd have to restructure the tutorial, give the Pit Boy earlier, or like put a extra combat section after getting the Pit Boy, which, there's no real point in doing that. It's kind of added effort that's not really necessary. And so I kind of don't really look at that as evidence one way or the other. I kind of it's gameplay related, and I feel like most of the time gameplay stuff is not congruent to you know the actual lore. I feel like in most games, like for just example, most games you'll be like a total badass in gameplay, but the second like some cutscene shows up, it's like, oh, the big guy, we have no chance. But in gameplay, you could easily beat him, like stuff like that. Like I don't think the gameplay really has much to do with the lore, so I don't really look at that as like proof for or against it. I just kind of ignore that because I don't think it's has a lot of weight, just personally, in my personal opinion. But yeah, I mean, I do give it merit. Yeah, that does definitely, if you are looking at it as if, oh, I want him to be a synth, it does point to that. But I think that's just a bit of a mistake on Bethesda's part, not really evidence one way or the other, in my personal opinion. Just, yeah, no, I think that's pretty much everything. Wraps it up. But yeah, I do not think that your protagonist is a thing. You know, there's stuff to lean towards it, lean against it, but in my humble opinion, I believe they're not a synth for the reasons I have given you. If you like my little thoughts on it, give it a like. If you didn't, oh well, I'm sorry. Yeah, like being a synth is cool, but also I just don't think it makes sense as much as just being a human guy. I just don't think it makes as much sense at the end of the day. So yeah, thanks for watching.